Oblivion. A game as fascinating and innovative as it is downright broken. But even after all these years, it still has that little something special that keeps pulling me back in. The game does have some issues with difficulty scaling, but there's still plenty of ways to break the intended game design, even in a casual playthrough. Spellcrafting is a great example of the game's systems having countless unintended consequences. I even did a big video a while back covering the wild things you can pull off with spellcrafting. However, there are also a lot of other unintended playstyles that are much more difficult to pull off. Now, if you haven't played it, you should know that Oblivion's gameplay mostly revolves around combat. As a result, the majority of story missions will involve going somewhere and killing something in order to progress. There are ways to avoid fights in many quests, but certainly not all of them. The game even tracks every enemy you've killed, offering an easy way to see how much destruction you've caused. Which brings me to the question that sparked this video. Can you beat Oblivion without dealing damage? While the game doesn't explicitly track damage numbers, I figured it would still be an interesting challenge. For this run, I set some basic rules. 1. Keep the number of enemies killed at 0, obviously. 2. Do not hurt enemies. This means no attacks or spells that cause damage. And 3. No summons. This was an important point, as you could easily level Conjuration and let your summon minions handle all the battles. Keeping these rules in mind, I set out on this very questionable playthrough. Starting from the character creator, I decided to pick a Khajiit. They have solid athletics, acrobatics, sneak, and speed, all valuable traits for a pacifist character. After a while, race isn't a huge factor, but the early bonuses are always nice to have. I sat through the auto-scroller intro until I finally got some time away from the Emperor. I used this opportunity to sprint through the caverns, looting everything in sight while fleeing from packs of angry rats. When it came time to pick my star sign, I went with the Thief. I mean, more agility, speed, and luck, what's not to love? After the Emperor's unfortunate accident, I ran around a bit while the guards finished off the assassins. They didn't seem to mind letting the slipperiest Khajiit in Tamriel hold onto the Amulet of Kings for a while. When it came time to choose a class, I went with the obvious choice and made a custom one. For base stats, I chose Intelligence and Willpower, as I intended on making good use of spellcrafting later on. For major skills, I went with Acrobatics, Alteration, Athletics, Illusion, Light Armor, Restoration, and Sneak. Normally you wouldn't want to pick your most used skills here at the risk of over-leveling later on. However, that wasn't a huge concern in this run. Enemy strength was only a minor annoyance, while the limitations of my skill levels were much more important. After making it out of the sewers, I beelined it straight for Wayne Priory to continue the main quest. On the way, I made sure to do plenty of jumping and spellcasting to get a few more skill levels in. After talking to Joffrey, I made a quick stop in Coral to join the Mages Guild. Once I was a member, I was free to take all of the expensive stuff lying around the guild and immediately sell it back to them. I used this money to buy a few spells and update my inventory before I headed off to Kvatch. Right off the bat, people expected some nobody prisoner to take down an Oblivion gate with only like 3 guards for help. The guards didn't last very long. After their untimely end, I simply sprinted off and made my way up the biggest tower in sight. There were plenty of angry Daedra along the way, but they couldn't keep up with me past a door or two. At the top, I simply ran past a few more enemies and grabbed the sigil stone, destroying the gate in the process. The tower did sort of explode when I took the stone, but my number of kills stayed at 0, so I'll just assume everything made it out before then. Next up, it was time to save Kvatch from inside the city itself. Savli and Mattias accompanied me inside, and I just kinda watched as he got knocked out repeatedly before finally killing the enemies at the gate. I did try going to the chapel while he was still fighting, but the quest wouldn't continue until the first area was clear. Inside the chapel, everyone made it seem like we needed to save Kvatch by reclaiming the castle. Unfortunately for them, Martin had already decided to follow me. So instead of saving the city, we just fast traveled back to Wayne Priory to continue the story. There were some assassins there, but Joffrey and his katana made swift work of them. Apparently while I was saving the world, he studied the blade. From there, Joffrey, Martin, and I headed off to Cloud Ruler Temple. I joined up with the Blades and then took a detour to Bruma to do a bit more shopping. At this point, I decided I was thoroughly lacking in the magic department, so I went off to do the intro quests for most of the mages guilds. Getting back on track, I met up with Boris for a little bit of sewer spelunking. Right before Boris was about to meet the Mythic Dawn, I snuck up and pickpocketed the book from the cultist. This sort of broke the quest and everyone just decided to walk off. Boris wasn't killed and the cultist didn't feel like attacking me either. Regardless, I had the book to progress the quest, so it all worked out in the end. Next I went over to Green Emperor Way and interacted with a glowy tomb at a specific time, because a book told me to. After that, it was off to the Lake Arius Caverns to see what those Mythic Dawn guys were up to. Inside, I took the friendly option and handed over all my equipment before getting a tour of the place. I ended up regretting this, as I had no intention of killing the doorman, so I had to pickpocket all of it back before making my next move. While Mankar Cameron was giving his speech, I had just strolled up on stage and grabbed the book right out from under him. Before making my great escape, I stopped briefly to free the prisoner, although who knows what happened to him immediately after that. From there was a long run through lots of samey looking caves filled with angry cultists. One of them must have been scared of cats or something, because he decided to flee right next to me. After bringing the book back to Cloud Ruler Temple, I was given some busy work looking for spies in Bruma. I did a short investigation before concluding that the cultist guys trying to kill me were definitely spies. Luckily I was in the middle of a city, so the guards made quick work of them. After that little excursion, Martin asked me to get him a Daedric artifact, like those are just lying around everywhere or something. I decided to get Azura's, mostly because that's the default one that gets marked on your map. Azura wanted me to clear out some people in a mine. Unfortunately for me, this quest only completes when all enemies are dead. This was obviously a big hurdle, having to find some way for all these enemies to get themselves killed. In the end, I painstakingly lured all of them out of the mine and over to the nearby Oblivion gate. The monsters hanging around the gate weren't too happy with other people on their turf, and a brawl broke out. Since I wasn't attacking, I suppose the monsters didn't see me as a threat, because they only focused on fighting the other enemies first. I gave Martin the artifact, said goodbye, and then went to go do a few more Mages Guild's quests. Of all the Mages Guild's quests, the Leowen one where you have to find an amulet in Fort Blue Blood was the most troublesome. You need to pick up the amulet to progress the quest, at which point Calthar attacks you and the door to the exit locks. Even worse, the door can only be opened with his key, so lockpicking was off the table. After many reloads, I managed to drag a few bandits into the room with Calthar. You'd think they were allies since they operate out of the same place, but they quickly turned on each other. A bandit knocked out Calthar, and his crumpled body spat a few lines of dialogue at me from the ground. Oddly, despite him still being alive and talking, I was able to loot his key and escape the fort. Most of the other Mages Guild's quests were pretty straightforward. However, the Skingrad quest to rescue Earthor did take quite a while. He wouldn't follow me out of the cave with any zombies alive, but he had the fighting abilities of a wet noodle. This led to a solid half hour of him dealing tiny amounts of damage, me struggling to heal him, and him ultimately getting knocked out. Rinse and repeat until he eventually managed to kill off all the zombies. After completing all the introductory quests, I was finally accepted into the Arcane University. As a brand new mage, I headed straight over to the Praxographical Center to do a little spell crafting. I made a couple useful spells there, like Strength and Shield on Touch to buff allies, and Speed on Self for more mobility. With a handful of new spells, I decided to go back to the main storyline. The next task was to close another Oblivion gate with a twist. You see, I tried running all the way through and grabbing the Sigil Stone like I did with the last one, but it didn't work. This quest requires you to teach the Bruma guards how to close an Oblivion gate. This means that you can't close the gate unless Bird is with you in the final room. Unfortunately, he has a bad habit of attacking literally everything in sight. My new buff spells did help him out a bit, but it was still very slow going. I didn't have enough magicka to keep him healthy all the time, so he was getting knocked out every other minute. There was even this one point where he fell into the lava and got knocked out. Every time he recovered, he would swim for a second before losing enough HP to get knocked out yet again. His AI didn't seem capable of swimming out, so he just repeatedly roasted in the lava until I reloaded my last save. Making use of an old trick I found ages ago, I decided to help Bird out a bit. I would simply stand on a slope near some lava and cast Paralyze on enemies that came to attack me. They would go stiff and plummet into the lava, with obvious results. Paralyze doesn't deal damage, and my kills remained at 0, so this was fair game for the run. Although even this wasn't necessary. I could have just sat there and waited for Bird to handle everything, but watching enemies ragdoll into the lava is infinitely amusing, so I don't regret it. After making our way up the tower, I grabbed the Sigil Stone and closed the Oblivion gate. Bird teleported out with me, although I have no idea how that works. Did he hold onto the stone too while the tower was crumbling? Probably not. I mean, I was all the way at the top of the room while he was fighting down below. Up next was one huge part I was dreading while planning out this run. Not just a run killer for speedrunners, but potentially one for my run as well. Sankrator. To complete this dungeon without major speedrun glitches, you must kill 4 undead blade skeletons so that their ghosts open the path forward. Even if you run through the winds, there's literally an invisible wall at the end until all 4 of them are dead. Luckily, there are traps in this dungeon that can hurt both you and the enemies. The first skeleton was an easy kill, just run him through the traps until he falls over. I made sure to check and it didn't count as a kill for me. Unfortunately, that's where my luck ran out. You see, some enemies in Oblivion will follow you through loading screen doors, while others will not. The ghosts in this dungeon will, but the skeletons will not. The 4 blades are in different parts of the dungeon, all separated by loading screen doors. Not all of these areas have traps in them. See the problem? This meant my only way of defeating the remaining blades was to get a ghost to cast a spell on me and then run behind a skeleton so it gets hit instead. The ghost's incredibly weak spells mixed with the skeleton's large health pools made this an excruciating experience. It took a solid 20 minutes of running around, dodging and healing, just to kill a single skeleton in this manner. Thankfully, after the second skeleton went down, I was graced with a shield enchanted with reflect damage. It's almost like the game felt bad for putting me through that pain. The following two skeletons went down much quicker, as they basically killed themselves hitting me. Interestingly enough, Oblivion counts an enemy dying from damage reflection as your kill. So I let the skeletons beat on me until they were inches from death, and then reverted to the ghost spell method to finish them off. With all the skeletons dead and the invisible wall gone, I grabbed the armor of Tiber Septim and ran out of that awful place. The last thing I needed to collect for the main storyline was the Great Welkin Stone and Miskarkand. This was another straightforward run past everything dungeon. The only hitch here was that grabbing the stone at the end locks all the doors and summons a lich. I didn't have high enough alteration for the open very hard lock spell, which would have let me get through a convenient shortcut. Luckily, there is a single hidden door with a hard lock in the room, which I did have the spell to open. From there, it was a quick jog out and back over to Cloud Ruler Temple. Nearing the end of the game, we're given the task of defending Bruma alongside Martin and his friends. This is supposed to be the huge battle scene in Oblivion, but in reality there's only like 10 people there. Gotta love the limitations of old games like these. I just kinda jumped around for a bit and watched the humans get picked off one by one while waiting for the Oblivion gates to open. Once the Great Gate was opened, I hopped in and made for the tower. One neat little trick you can do even in casual play is completely ignore these small gates. Just jump around them and skip large chunks of the area. The rest of the quest was pretty unremarkable. Just a quick trip up the tower to grab the sigil stone while hordes of Daedra chased me. Before heading off to Paradise, I went back to the Arcane University to craft a couple new spells. Mostly stronger buffs for allies, healing over time, damage reduction, and the like. Back at Cloud Ruler Temple, Martin opened up a portal to Paradise and just kinda told me to deal with it. For whatever reason, nobody else wanted to help save the world, so I was left to handle it alone, again. Paradise was pretty straightforward, just a bunch of caves full of angry enemies that I mostly ran past with invisibility on. Before going into Mankar's room, I brought some monsters over to the Camerons standing outside to start a fight. After a little while, they went down, and I was able to grab a pretty nifty ring with Spell Reflect on it. All prepared for the final encounter, I made my way into Mankar's room, and this is where the pain began. Let me try to break down all the annoying factors at play here. Mankar constantly regenerates his health at a pretty high rate. The other two Camerons respawn very quickly if they're killed. Reflecting any damage or spell that kills any of the Camerons counts as a kill, forcing a reload. The room is locked with no way out. Monsters cannot be brought into the room, even if they will follow you through other doors. Your only help is a very weak NPC named Eldamil, who only has a robe and a dagger. And Mankar has very high spell absorption, so a large portion of his spells you reflect won't even damage him. In the end, this was just a very long test of trial and error with countless reloads. I got very close to downing him just by carefully reflecting spells while allowing NPCs to chip away health here and there. But then all of a sudden, this happened. I don't really know how to explain it, even after watching it back countless times. I'll slow it down so you can see just what I saw. We've got one Cameron standing and watching by the throne for some reason, one summon fading out, Mankar at the bottom of the stairs casting some fire-based spell, Mankar's spell being absorbed, or possibly reflected by the other Cameron, that same Cameron casting lightning and then swinging their sword at me. Mid-swing, Mankar must have died, because all the NPCs die in unison and the place starts to collapse. Maybe that fire spell reflected off the other Cameron and killed Mankar? If you have any guesses, feel free to leave them in the comments. And yes, I made sure to triple check the kill count. Still 0. Anyways, with that out of the way, I had a quick chat with Martin before heading to the Imperial City. You'd think that you actually have to do the objective for this quest, you know, protect Martin and escort him and all that. Nope, you can just run to the endpoint and wait a bit for him to catch up. All that was left was a short cutscene before the ending cinematic played out. With that, we're finally able to answer the question I asked myself months ago. Yes, you can beat Oblivion without dealing damage. It's not intended, and it is a very slow and difficult process, but it was an interesting challenge nonetheless. If you made it this far, big thanks for sticking around through this wild ride. As always, if you want to support the channel, subscribing helps out a lot. I do have a couple other big Oblivion videos, like an analysis of the leveling system, or a breakdown of the crazy things you can do with spellcrafting. If you're interested in that stuff, I'll link those videos below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.